So welcome back everybody to another MOTOBOB video, and this is the start of our EICMA 2025 run of content. But as you might have noticed, we're not in Milan, but in a studio in the UK. You see, we've been lucky enough to be invited to pre-shoot this one, and so that allows us plenty of time to go over what is a spectacular new bike from Norton. So in this video, we'll go nose to tail of every detail with everything that you need to know. Now, I think actually one of the best places to start with this bike is one of the smaller details, and that's the logo. Norton have a new logo design, a new identity, and that's been done to signify a real shift in what the entire brand and product lineup is about. From speaking to the team here at Norton, we're going to see more and more products from them over the next few months and years that really play into their brand identity, they say, of innovation, something that they reckon has run through the company ever since its inception. Part of that is pushing forward. It's about modern, daring design. And so in order to reflect that, we've got a Norton logo that does have something in common with the one that we're so used to, but certainly a more contemporary look that I guess takes it in a new direction. This isn't just a surface level rebrand though. They say they started with the bikes, and actually the logo redesign came later. What you'll see with this bike immediately from looking at this front end is something that does look more modern, more contemporary, and where design is right at the forefront of what this bike is all about. In fact, they say in many motorcycle companies, styling is a secondary function to engineering. You build the bike and then try and make it look nice. Whereas at Norton, where they're striving to create a beautiful, luxurious product, well, they're on level pegging. Pretty much everything that makes this bike go has to look good as well. One of the things that I really love about it is just how clean and compact it looks. And part of that is the fact that you don't have any aero appendages or anything that's particularly track focused, nor do you have any external fasteners. And so you're left with something that really does look visually beautiful and uncluttered. Now, the front end isn't completely new to us because we have seen spy shots of this bike in the lead up to its launch, some of them posted by Norton themselves. And I think quite a lot of you remarked that it did have a little bit of a look of Panigale about it, specifically with the shape of the headlights, kind of harking back to, Panigale 1098s or 1198s. And perhaps that's no huge coincidence. Speaking to Simon, the head of design at Norton, he says that his job is now to find the best designers that the world has to offer and then help to get the best out of them. And that means bringing in designers that have worked on Ducati motorcycles, that have worked on Hondas, and that have worked on Yamahas, for example. Then with some of the mechanical stuff, the new suspension, those Brembo high pure calipers, we've got carbon rims here as well, Pirelli Supercorsa tires. It's got this kind of fast, purposeful, sporty look to it, but just pared back a little bit from the sort of racing-derived bikes that are so common now at the top end of the sports bike market. Moving back ever so slightly here, we can take a little bit of a look at the cockpit. And, one of the things that was interesting to learn about was the fact that some stuff, the tail light, for example, that we'll get onto in a little bit, was almost instant in terms of its design. It just looked right straight away. Whereas some of the other parts that perhaps seem a little less important, like, for example, this new mirror design, can take many, many iterations and can take many months or years. I think the result is worth it though, and one of my pet peeves perhaps about some bikes, even if they're fairly expensive, is that they can look unconsidered or undesigned in the cockpit, whereas this, again, is perfectly designed. And I think that's important because when you're riding the bike, this is where you spend pretty much most of your time looking. It flows seamlessly into this carbon liner that there's, again, no real visible fastenings to apart from a couple of bolts at the top. There's a big TFT dash that has a user interface that again has been designed to be part of this philosophy. It's got dedicated switchgear with these metal machined buttons that really do have a nice feel in the hand. And even some of the details like the caps on the electronically adjustable suspension, well, they feel unnecessarily beautiful as well. They didn't have to machine them like that, but they do look really very nice. It flows back from here through the tank and through the seat, all finished in this typical Norton silver, which I think really does show off the lines of this bike. But they do say, although it is a new direction for Norton as a company, you know, this is a little nod to their heritage, and it's almost, well, it just feels right, doesn't it, to have this bike in its first instance in silver. Moving back now though to this tail section, and I think I would say this is probably the masterpiece of this entire bike. It's just something that looks fantastic from pretty much any angle, and I don't believe that's any accident. You'll have noticed they've gone for a single seat setup, so perhaps not one for a weekend away touring with a passenger, but it does keep it super clean, super tidy, and gives it a little bit of sporty aggression. One of the things they said is that they wanted the bike to have that forward lean, that kind of fast standing still kind of look. And to me, you know, looking at it here in the studio, they've definitely hit the mark. This taillight as well, I think, is one of my favorites on the market now. It's a very simple design with the lines horizontally, but it is striking, and I would say as well, unique on the motorcycle market now. But I also really like how it's echoed a couple of times, firstly with these side panels, or the sides of the subframe, let's say, and then also in the seat where you've got similar stripes running down the length of it. Now, one of the things we've talked about a little bit today is the fact that this bike is primarily designed to be a great road bike, and it's not necessarily in search of, you know, MotoGP levels of performance. And I think one of the symptoms of that, or one of the design choices that reflects that, could be said to be this single-sided swing arm at the rear, which really does show off these beautiful carbon wheels, which I believe will be, you know, spec'd on the top level model of this bike. Recently, for example, we've had Ducati redesign the Panigale swing arm to make it a dual-sided swing arm for better performance, they say. But I wouldn't be the first person to say that it doesn't look quite as exciting or exotic as previous iterations of the Panigale. And so if you are looking to make the most visually appealing bike possible, then I believe, anyway, this is the right way to go. Now, there isn't really much at all in common with the V4 SV that went before this bike, but I will say one of the shapes that I see reflected is this bit of the swing arm where the chain passes through. So potentially one of the very few nods, let's say, to previous sports bikes in the Norton lineup. Now, I think this idea that design has as much weight in as engineering is perhaps most apparent around this kind of area, because this is where many motorcycles can begin to start looking a little bit busy or perhaps unfinished, whereas this bike just looks like every little bit has been thought out and designed with some real effort. The heel guard, the shift lever, the foot peg hangers are all very nice to look at in their own right. And I've got to say, this is probably one of the best looking side stands you'll ever see on a motorcycle. Up through here, we've got the new frame design, which is very different to the bike that went before it. And then it's wrapped up in this silver bodywork with a bit of bare carbon on this sort of insert here, which does give it, as they say, that forward-leaning, flowing design, which makes it so easy on the eye. I love these little vents here as well. They're just a nice little touch, nothing too busy. And then down the bottom, you'll also notice this is where the exhaust kind of hides. Again, that means a cleaner view of that beautiful rear wheel because it's not blocked partially by a silencer. But also, I'd say that's a rather nice piece of design in its own right. Now, today has really been focused on, you know, the new brand, the new ethos, and the design and looks of the bike. But in a couple of weeks' time, I'm heading up to Norton in Solihull to their headquarters to learn more about the technical stuff. There's lots of clues here. I'd love to start talking about it. Stuff like a little microphone button on the switchgear. So I assume there's some voice commands, for example. I can see a little bit of the suspension and brake setup. We could talk about the wheels and tires. But probably the best thing to do is jump to Future Bob with all the specific details so I can fill you in on all the technicalities.
So here we are at the Norton event the night before EICMA to get these videos in the bag in advance. And so before we get onto the kind of technical stuff that I've since found out about this new Manx R, I just want to give a massive thanks to Kalamoto for supporting our EICMA coverage and making this trip possible. Kalamoto is a brilliant motorcycle specific navigation app that uses their own dedicated in-house algorithm. And so if you want to avoid boring straight roads and find all the good twisties, it'll help you to plan a route and seek them out and give you the best possible motorcycle rides. Now look, if you come into the show, I've got these golden Kalamoto tickets, which will get you 12 months free premium membership on Kalamoto. So if you can find me, hopefully I've got some left and I'll give you one of those. But also if you're just watching back home, we've got for the duration of the show a 10% discount on their premium membership. So do have a look down in the description below if you want to find out more about that. And once again, a huge thanks to Kalamoto for their support. So let's start with the engine on this bike, and it's a 1200cc 72 degree V4, and they've confirmed that it will make 206 horsepower peak. A pretty, substantial figure, but they really reiterated tonight on how much road focus there is with this bike, with them having done loads of research as to sort of where in the rev range people spend most of their time when they're riding out on the road. That's why they say they've really worked hard to make sure that this peak figure occurs as low as possible. And so it actually comes in that 206 horsepower peak at 11,000 RPM, which if you compare it to like a Panigale V4, which is more so built for the track, is about 2,500 RPM lower, and so fairly impressive stuff. They also showed a dyno chart versus some of the competition and just how much more mid-range this bike has, and it's got a peak torque figure of 130 Newton meters, which is really quite strong. They say it's class leading, and also that's made down at 9,000 RPM, so it'll be really interesting to ride this bike and see how it feels out on the road, because if I am truly honest, having ridden the Panigale V4 earlier this year, Tim rode it as well, you don't touch the sides of what it can do you? And so I admire that Norton have taken a slightly different approach with this particular bike. As for the rest of the engine sort of stuff, we've got 5 riding modes, so rain, standard, sport, and then there are 2 custom slots for the track. If you do want to take it to the track, I'm sure it'll still be a more than capable bike in that setting. We've got a slipper clutch, we've got a 6-speed box with fairly road bias ratios, up and down quick shifter, and also an interesting feature called an optimal gear suggestion prompt. So I guess that's a little bit like in my Transit when it tells me to shift up when I'm revving it too hard. Anyway, onto the chassis, and we've got a new frame, of course, for this bike versus the V4 SV, for example, that it basically replaces. And again, the name of the game is road riding, with something that they've built to be, responsive and quick handling, but also comfortable, with plenty of flex in the right places to make it, not too much of a handful and not too much of a bone shaker. They also say when the bike's banked over, you need plenty of lateral flex so that it can find grip, and so that's been a big focus as well. And then also they say it's got a phenomenal suspension package, which they've worked on with Marzocchi to bring you some, proper good semi-active electronically adjustable stuff. They say it ties into the riding mode, so it can go from super comfortable and, eating up the bumps to basically racetrack sharp within the touch of a few buttons. And then the rest of the chassis spec is pretty fantastic as well. So Brembo's high pure calipers on big 330mm discs, so they're top of the range Brembo stuff. We've got those beautiful wheels that we've already talked about, the carbon BTS rims, and of course they're going to have a profound effect on the handling of the bike. Less unsprung weight, less rotating weight means quicker turning, quicker acceleration, quicker deceleration, and also better response from the suspension. And then they're shod with Pirelli's Diablo Supercorsa V4 SP tyres with a 120/70 up front and a 200/55 at the rear. Now the whole lot, they say, well, they're aiming for it to come in around 204 kilograms, and so again, this is a different bike to something that's really track specific, although they didn't say whether that's a dry weight or a wet weight, so it could either come in like a few kilograms heavier than some of those more track focused competitors, or it might be a good 10 or 20 kilos. It just depends when they confirm that as to what that exact weight measurement will be. But realistically, having a featherweight bike, if you are predominantly riding it on the road, and if you're predominantly buying it for a luxury product, something that's beautiful to look at as well, probably isn't as much of a big deal. And so that's realistically why they haven't completely weight-weaned the heck out of this bike. Now, we already saw the cockpit back in the studio, but let me reiterate, 8-inch dash, touchscreen as well, connectivity built in, lots of different themes, beautiful switchgear, all nicely laid out. An IMU, you've got cornering sensitive traction control and ABS, you've got slide control, you've got wheelie control, you've got rear wheel lift control as well, but also some more sort of unusual features. They talked about cornering cruise control, which can accommodate the smaller radius of the tires when the bike's starting to bank over on those kind of long bends on the motorway. So it will maintain its speed despite leaning a little bit, which is not something I've heard of on any other bike. They also talk about live tracking and theft alerts, so it's got kind of security features built in already. Slope dependent control as well, which they say makes it easier or more convenient to go up or down steep gradients. I don't know the specifics of that yet, but we'll find out when they, I guess, launch this bike for a review. And so it really is a comprehensive tech package that should put this bike, sort of at the bleeding edge of the sports bike market. Ergonomically, no seat height as of yet, but it looks like a fairly sort of moderate riding position. It doesn't look like a super tall bike, but yeah, fairly balanced, kind of aggressive, kind of sporty, fairly low bars, but not the most, again, track focused, most aggressive that we've seen yet. But if sports bikes just aren't your thing, then it is probably worth pointing out at this stage of proceedings that there will also be this naked equivalent, which is just called the Manx as opposed to the Manx R. It looks pretty much the same in many regards. We don't have the exact specs of this one, but looking at some of the components and the engine and this tail section, they do look very similar indeed. But you will have noticed they've done away with the fairing and also fitted some slightly sat-up bars. They're not exactly flat, tubular handlebars, but they do sit up quite a bit further. And so let's have a little sit on this, Tim. Oh, my jeans are a bit tight. Pull them up. Limber up. Let's go again. And yeah, this is much more typical of your sporty naked. In fact, it feels really quite comfortable indeed. The seat is quite narrow at the front. I think they said they've done that to help with standover, but also if you do want to push your bum back, it kind of curves up quite a lot, so you can get a little bit over the front and aggressive. Foot pegs fairly tucked up, but again, if you put the balls of your feet further back, it feels quite sporty, but if you shuffle forward a touch, you can probably chill out for those motorway cruises. And so, yeah, this feels pretty comfortable actually, considering it is, a 200 horsepower V4. Now, we'll say, I think this is still quite a nice looking bike. In fact, it's a really good looking bike, but it maybe just isn't quite as drop dead gorgeous as the Manx R, with a bit more of a typical naked kind of front end with this headlight down here and some of the same shapes, but not quite as swooping because they haven't been able to kind of carry it through to pinch point here through the fairing. I don't know, it's nice. If you see it in the flesh, it's a cool looking bike, but the Manx R is the one that really just, I think, is a pêche de la pêche. This bike has been super busy, the Manx R, with people trying to get their videos and photos and stuff, so I've only just got a chance to sit on it, but of course it is much more aggressive than the Manx, but it's still not crazy levels of sports bike cramped, and so it does feel like it has a nice balance. But onto the price, unfortunately it's still TBC, as with a lot of the tech specs and details of some of these new Nortons, but they do say it's going to be reflective of their luxury position in the motorcycle market. So if you're hoping for this one to be cheap, then I think you'll be sorely disappointed. They do say they're hoping to make luxury kind of attainable, and so maybe they're working to make sure the prices aren't just astronomical, but realistically we've got to be looking at least the 20 to 30 grand range for a bike like this, perhaps beyond. So I'd love to know what you think of it down in the comments below. Do let us know. Once again, a massive thanks to Kalimoto for their support. Check out those links if you haven't already. I'll also put a playlist on the screen of all of our EICMA content, so do give that a watch if you want to see every bike that we cover. We're looking for the best bikes this year, and so yeah, do give it a watch if you love your bikes. Also, if you've not subscribed already, hit subscribe to see all of our videos as soon as they come up. A massive thanks for watching this one, and we'll see you in the next video.